Hello, and welcome back to the Alexander Society. This is a podcast about winning wars with doohickeys. Tim, do you get excited about doohickeys?
Depends on what kind of doohickey, my good brother.
Okay, that was kind of out of left field, but I like the energy.
I associate the word doohickey with southern shit, so I just went super southern.
With Southern. Is that how you pronounce Southern? Southern?
When I overpronounce my natural accent and don't try and cover it up, like I do unconsciously, yes.
All right.
That's when you know, like, when you're trying to force it out and it comes out way too strong kind of thing.
I get it. Both of us do have a little bit of like a Southern, or at least like an Oklahoma sort of
Twang.
twang that comes out sometimes, yeah.
We got a twang.
Yeah, I never really noticed it until I like actually started trying to look for it.
Yeah, I know it colors my day-to-day speech, but like I've gotten to the point of covering it where it would be a lot worse.
Yeah, I thought my only little bit was just that that I picked up from my parents is that I do actually I grew up unironically using both howdy and y'all regularly and like just day-to-day speech. I never got why everybody thought it was so funny, but
Howdy, y'all.
Yeah, anyways, I'm your host, a bureaucrat shitting myself in a basement, Derek, joined by my co-host, a pissed-off peasant militiaman, Tim. How you doing, Tim?
I ain't touching that with a 20-foot pole, brother.
What, me shitting myself and you pissed off?
The shitting yourself part.
Yeah.
I'm doing pretty good. Working through my own demons, trying to fix myself, make myself a better human. I'm doing pretty good. What about you?
I'm doing all right. If for some reason you hear thunder and rain outside, or maybe perhaps a tornado siren,
we apologize. Both of our areas are saying we might die.
Yeah, and I'm still here doing this. I have no idea why. I guess I don't know. I'm not.
Because we're from Oklahoma, we don't believe it till it touches down like 5 feet away.
Yeah, people think the tornado siren is the bad part. That's not the bad part. When the tornado siren stops going is when it gets bad. So,
Derek, what is thou drinking tonight?
What am I drinking? So for my shots, I'm just pulling out the Bumbu, and then for my sipper, got some more Angry Scotsman, my favorite brewery. I got one of their. I think this is like their staple. Their staple brew it's called Rusty Kiltpin. It's a Scottish style export ale. It's 5.2%. It's basically like a very dark ale. It has like it's still very smooth and very casual, but it has like a nice little texture of like that bitterness you get from like a stout or something. I really like it. It's a very nice balance. And Tim, what are you drinking?
So after having bought this myself months and months ago, it got back to me. Marshall Brewing Company, Helles Lager, This Land Lager. Not normally something I usually went for. I found it at a gas station when we thought we were recording and when I didn't have any beer for a recording. Not my cup of tea, but it's not as bad as I thought, and I'm not going to hate it. So it is what it is.
I really liked it. I thought it was pretty solid.
Yeah, but we have different tastes in beers. And then for my liquor, just to meme it up with Derek for his choice of liquor last episode, during our DB Tuber episode, I decided to break open the bottle of Crown Royal I was gifted for helping with a car repair. Just regular straight Crown Royal whiskey. It's a liter bottle. It's a big bottle.
It's soft. It's kind of the stereotype like whiskey. It's like a poor man's rich man's whiskey, but it's still pretty good.
It's not I'm not a whiskey guy, as we know, so it's whatever, but again, I don't hate it. I actually really love taking the 2 liters a Minute Maid, drinking a glass, then pouring some of the rum in there. Not the rum, though, the Crown Royal in there, mixing it up, and that makes an amazing dirty lemonade.
That actually sounds really good. Oh, I'm going to try that some. There's a bunch of cocktails I got to try because I haven't.
Getting back on subject, on to our rules, Derek. You want to go ahead and give us the rundown?
Oh, hey, let me tell you, here on the Alexander Society, we abide by an ever-changing set of rules. And the first of our rules today is that rule number 1, every time Japan takes a big L, we're going to take a sip.
Rule number 2, every time Korea takes a big L, 3 sips.
And rule number 3, anytime our main guy today gets demoted for some reason, we're going to take a shot.
Hell yeah, brother. Let's go ahead and get that first one in there. Hold on. Is there a Korean cheers? Gyeonbae. But I don't know of the pronunciation on that, and I do not want to be insensitive. Let me hear the word, because I know they have that. Gombe. Gombe. Like, Gombe.
Gombe. Oh, yeah. Who are we learning about? Okay, so this guy, I'm so excited about this guy. This is one of those topics that just, I really like this guy's story.
You found some, like, recently some really, I wouldn't say really niche topics, but, like, you've had a lot of drive behind some of these episodes recently, and, like, I really like the episodes where, like, you're super excited about the topic.
Yeah, so this guy, he's not super well known in the Western world, which is kind of disappointing. But on the other hand, I know this guy's such a Giga Chad. Like the stereotypical Giga Chad, just superhero sort of guy, that if he were better known in the West, we'd have, like, you know those dipshits that make, like, the YouTube channels where it's just like funk edits of, like, Julius Caesar and shit like that. It's like, it's not real history. It's like, it's kind of treating history as the same way that, like, people treat, like, Star Wars.
Yeah, no, like, I get what you're saying. It's basically fan accounts for, like, historical figures.
Yeah, like, I'm kind of glad that those guys don't know about this guy, because they would beat this guy's story into the ground. Because he's just such a badass. So this guy, his name is Yi Sun-Sin, and he is up there as probably one of the most brilliant military commanders who has ever lived. Specifically, one of the most brilliant naval commanders who has ever lived. I've heard him, like, talked about in the same vein as, like, Horatio Nelson at the Battle of Trafalgar and stuff like that. He is up there. And when you, like, hear his story, you're going to understand why. Because he never fought a battle where he was not outnumbered he never outnumbered any battles. He was always outnumbered.
He never got to fight a fair fight.
Right. And the only battle that he technically lost, he wasn't even present for, because he had been, we'll get into it. He always won. He always won against insane odds. He always won. So let's kind of set the scene first, because this is a very not well-known period of history here in the West. This is going to be the 1500s. So we are actually going to be going back to the same period of time that we talked about in our episode on Tokugawa Ieyasu.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, because the end of... We actually talked...
So we've kind of been sticking in that little... Because last week we were kind of close to that time period. We're kind of sticking in that same kind of time range.
Yeah.
With the 47 Ronin, not my episode, obviously, but your last episode.
Yeah. So the 47 Ronin was around 1700, but it was in the middle of the Edo period, the Tokugawa shogunate, which was founded right after this conflict ends that we're going to be talking about today. And it heavily involves this conflict because this is the last big hurrah for the second of the three great unifiers of Japan, Toyotomi Hideyoshi. This war, we actually talked about it in that episode, because Hideyoshi got involved in this war because he had grand ambitions of taking his newly reunited Japan and making it like the dominant imperial power in East Asia. And then he got bogged down in this awful, terrible conflict in Korea, and then eventually had to withdraw. And then right after that, he died, and that is what allowed Ieyasu to rise to power. We're going to be talking about the guy who's the reason that they had to withdraw. This guy almost single-handedly was the reason that Japan failed in Korea. It was obviously a very complicated conflict, but...
It's not that black and white, but, like... If you just look at the dartboard, you would say, yep, him.
Yeah, without this guy involved, there's a very real possibility that Korea would have just ceased to exist in the 1500s. And possibly even, like, China, too.
Fuck.
That was a very real possibility, yeah. So, it's the 1500s, and Korea is ruled by a kingdom called the Kingdom of Joseon. And Joseon is part of, at the time, China's big, giant tributary system. This is Imperial China. They're the dominant powerhouse in East Asia, and they pretty well control, like, even other countries, like, besides China throughout East Asia through this tributary system, where basically they take tributary payments, like tax payments, from all of these smaller countries around them, and then give them a bunch of cushy trade deals and cushy and like military protection and stuff like that in return. And so it wasn't like an exploitative sort of tributary system. There was people, like, other countries, like, not universally, but other countries involved, especially Korea, became very lucrative off of this deal. And Korea was in a really advantageous position because the only two, like, major powers that they had sort of bordering them was on their west was China, who was officially like their ally and sort of their protector. And on the east was Japan, which for about a century by this point had been engulfed in like a bitter continuous civil war called the Warring States period that we talked about, the Sengoku Jidai. And so they would never be like a powerful threat to invade Korea at any given point. And even when they were united, like before then, they weren't really like trying to invade Korea or anything. The only real military threat they ever faced were the nomadic steppe tribes that lived over their northern border in what would eventually become Manchuria. And I can't remember what they're called now. There's like this specific tribe that like pretty regularly like to come down, and they're like horseback people that like to come down and raid them a lot. And that was like really their only military threat. And most of the time, these were like small raids that they could fight off pretty easily. And for the bigger ones, they could always just bring China's army in and they would help out. So it was never really like a big deal. And so they didn't really have to spend all of that much time on defense. And so they had a lot of resources to spare putting it into other things, specifically like philosophy, academics, and scientific advancement. And so during this time, Korea was actually like arguably one of the most advanced nations on the planet at this point. They had like a very ahead of their time sophisticated understanding of astronomy, and they're developing like some more advanced forms of mathematics. There were like early primitive forms of physics, things like that. Philosophically, they were in the middle of this revolution of Confucian thought that was called Neo-Confucianism, and it as it moved through like their academic spheres, it created like this. It was basically like steroids to their whole bureaucratic system, and because it's a very complicated sort of philosophy, Neo-Confucianism, but basically it's just like injecting steroids into a nerd.
Okay.
They just got really good. A lot of very passionate people dedicated their entire lives to bureaucracy, and so they had a very sophisticated government bureaucratic system. And it was a pretty neat thing for a while. So yeah, Joseon, the Kingdom of Joseon was they were a pretty like quote unquote like little L liberal sort of monarchy. They had they even had like a sense of like freedom of speech and freedom of expression, that type of thing. A very, very like not universal, but like it was there. It was something. It was a pretty advanced sort of culture for its time, and but the problem is with all systems of power, it eventually attracts like the most corrupt kind of people to it, and it ended up becoming a sort of corrupt system. It became mired in sort of nepotism and family infighting and ideological divisions within the bureaucratic state. And in the years leading up to our main character's birth, there had been a lot of infighting within the Korean state. there had been several waves of like persecutions of especially the orthodox sort of neo-Confucian people like within the state political system had suffered like several purges where like a lot of it's so weird, just like nerd street gangs like dragging each other out of their homes and executing them in the street and stuff like that. It was really weird sorts of political upheavals. But that's sort of what you're seeing happening in Japan at this time, or in Korea at this time, is a very sophisticated, very complicated sort of government in sort of like the middle of a golden age that's starting to like kind of wither and die under the weight of its own blossoming corruption, basically. And then you turn to the east and you look at what's going on in Japan. And what's going on in Japan is what we talked about in the episode about Tokugawa Ieyasu. They are coming out of their... So they had like a century, several generations worth of constant civil war between the different daimyos in Japan. And then one daimyo in particular came out, and he was just so much better than everybody else. This guy named Oda Nobunaga. He ends up conquering and uniting all of central Japan, forming a solid block. And then he's murdered. And then one of his lieutenants, a guy named Toyotomi Hideyoshi, takes over. And he takes what Oda Nobunaga built and uses that political and military force to reunite all of Japan and bring it under his shogunate. And this is happening just about the time that our protagonist is kind of reaching adulthood.
Okay.
And Hideyoshi he's riding pretty high because he kind of ended this whole period of civil war in Japan, and he's united like a very militarily and economically powerful country under his rule. And he really wants to throw that weight at something. He really wants to do something with it. And he figures the best next step for Japan is to start expanding. And so he starts eyeing up. He sets the lofty goal and ambition of conquering China.
Jeez.
He wants to conquer all of China. And to conquer China, he first has to get through the closest landmass to Japan, which is Korea. And that is when the ominous music starts in the background of the movie as we move into our talking about our main character. Yi Sun-Sin was born on April 28th, 1545 in the town of Hansong, which is today a neighborhood in the city of Seoul. At the time, it was a suburb of Seoul, and today it is like just part of Seoul because Seoul got really big. Yi was born into a family of neo-Confucian politicians and bureaucrats. So sort of like that bureaucratic noble class that was really big in this neo-Confucian sort of order. And they were part of like the orthodox sort of Confucian faction. And so none of their family specifically were targeted, but a lot of like their close friends and associates were actually murdered in some of these purges. And so they ended up leaving politics altogether and kind of just living off their family's wealth. As a kid, this guy, Yi, which is his family name, by the way, family name comes first, and then Sun-Sin was his given name. But Yi was, as a kid, he loved to play like soldier with his friends. Like when they'd be playing in the street, they'd take up sticks and they'd pretend to like stab each other with spears. And it was noted that when he was a kid, all of his friends always made him the commander because he always liked to give really good speeches, and he was always like very inspiring and like to give these dramatic speeches to rally the troops whenever they would play these games. And it was kind of like people kind of pointed out from like a very early age, he was kind of a born leader. He attracted a lot of loyalty and a lot of respect from his peers. A big chunk of his teenage years and his 20s, basically we don't know anything about what he was doing when he was in his 20s. he kind of just appears back into the historical record when he's about 30 or 31, because that's when he took his military examination.
Okay.
Which was very strange because most men who tried to go into the Joseon military at the time were like 16. So him taking them at 31 was very strange and out of the ordinary. And nobody's really quite sure why he waited so long. We do know that he ended up taking the examinations twice. He failed the first time because even though he had very high scores on most of the subjects, he wasn't able to finish the exam because during the cavalry section, he fell off of his horse and broke his leg.
Oh, damn.
Mm-hmm.
That would grind my gears to, like, so close, just fucking breaks leg.
Yeah. But the following year, he took the exams again, and he was 31. He had some of the highest scores that any of his examiners had ever seen in a candidate. He scored well on basically everything. Infantry tactics, cavalry, archery, seacraft, like naval stuff. Basically scored high on everything. He scored the highest of anybody that had ever taken the exam, specifically on archery. He was an incredible archer, which makes sense because he made his own bow and fletched his own arrows at the age of like 8, and so he'd been arching pretty much his entire life. Is that arching? Doing archery? Arching? Is that a thing?
I don't know. I've never heard that term before. That sounds kind of sus, so I wouldn't go with that term, but you do you, brother.
Whatever. He was really good at shooting arrows. So yeah, he passes the examination with flying colors, and he's made a junior officer. And he is stationed with the Northern Frontier Army. So he's sent up to the northern part of Korea into what's now like Manchuria.
Okay.
And while he's up there, he successfully fought several battles against the nomadic horse people that I was telling you about. Here, this is what they're called. They're called the Jurchen, and he was able to beat them in battles several times, which is like a pretty interesting thing. Is like he did like the typical tactics weren't really like beat them. It was kind of like fight them in like smaller skirmishes until and make it too costly for them to try to raid. You never really got into like a pitched battle with them because it never really ended well. He beat them in pitched battles.
Damn.
Which is really impressive. Also, the Jurchen would later be called the Manchus. And they would be called the Manchus after a couple generations after this guy. They would actually come under the rule of like this charismatic leader, kind of like Genghis Khan. And they would invade China successfully and overthrow the old dynasty and create their own new dynasty.
Dang.
And that's how the Qing dynasty was founded, and that was the dynasty that would rule China up until the Chinese Revolution in the early 1900s.
I had no idea. Like it was up until that recently that they had a dynasty like that in China.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. So I thought that was cool. This is the origin of the Manchus. These are the proto-Manchus that he's fighting right now. And so through these conflicts, he starts to earn a reputation in the Korean military as like an effective strategist and leader. And I hope you notice at this point, right now, he's leading armies. He's not an admiral yet. He's famous. Like he's famous for his stuff he did as an admiral. He's not even an admiral yet. This is stuff he's doing like with ground armies.
Oh, dang.
Yeah. So in 1583, he lured the Jurchen into a trap and ended up capturing the chief of this Jurchen warband, which ended up making him like a national hero throughout Korea. He started making all of the... everybody knew his name. He became like a national hero overnight because this was a very impressive thing. Nobody had ever caught one of their chiefs. And here's the problem, though. You remember how I said that the Joseon bureaucracy was getting pretty corrupt by this point? That extended to the military.
Of course.
And it seemed like Yi Sun-Sin was doing pretty well for himself and was starting to catch the attention of the king of Joseon. And it looked like he had a bright career ahead of him. And they didn't want that because they didn't want anybody overshadowing their careers. And so there was another general. There's this general by the name of Yi Il. And he got a bunch of other generals together and hatched this conspiracy where they basically came up with this lie that they started circulating around the entire Korean army that Yi Sun-Sin had fled from battle and deserted his army in order to discredit him. It was a complete fabrication, a complete lie. This had never happened. But it was believed by enough powerful people that he ended up being removed from his command and stripped of his rank. And then he was imprisoned for cowardice.
That's fucked.
And then he was tortured. And then he was told that he would never serve as an officer in the Joseon military ever again.
Sounds like their loss.
It was it definitely would have been their loss. The problem was, Yi Sun-Sin was a very spiteful man. He would do like really dumb self-destructive things even just to spite people. And so what he decided was, okay, well, if I'm never going to serve as an officer again, then I'm just going to enlist. And so he drops down from basically like a colonel down to like a private.
That's a demotion.
That is a demotion, yes.
I don't remember how to pronounce the word, so I'm just going to go with cheers.
Whatever, pros. Yeah, I guess technically that I will count. I would count this as a demotion because he's removed from the military and then he just voluntarily re-enlists as like an enlisted soldier. But I'll count. I'd say that's a demotion. So here's the spiteful part. He ends up doing so well as a line soldier that the government is begrudgingly kind of forced through public pressure to give him back his officer rank.
Hell yeah.
But to kind of still keep him out of the way, he's transferred to a non-combat role as an instructor and a military governor in a small rural town out in the middle of nowhere. And so he's not doing any heroic shit anymore.
That sucks, but like that's politics for you.
Yeah. So let's fast forward a little bit to 1590. So a couple things were happening in 1590. The first thing is Toyotomi Hideyoshi had just finished his reunification of Japan. And so Japan is reunited, and they have a really powerful and really well-veteraned military from the last 100 years of civil war. And they're now all united under one single banner. And Korea, the kingdom of Joseon, is starting to freak the fuck out a little bit.
Understandably so.
The second thing that's happening during this time is that Yi Sun-Sin was making friends. You know, his position as like a military governor, it wasn't prestigious and it wasn't exciting, but it was giving him opportunities to schmooze with a lot of powerful people. And so he was starting to make powerful friends in the kingdom of Joseon. And they were able to convince the king that this guy Yi was the guy that they needed to help bring up Korea's military readiness in case Japan did actually try to invade. And so Yi was reassigned, and he was placed in command of Korea's naval forces. And how is this pronounced? I think it's Jeolla province, which is basically like the southwestern corner of the peninsula, like this whole southwestern bit. And once he got there, he started pumping all of the resources at his disposal into building new ships and training up their crews. He just tirelessly, day and night, spent the entire time organizing how do we get all of the resources we need to these dockyards to build new ships, and how do we get guys onto the ships and get them to know what they're doing. That's all he did for months. And this was a really important thing because Korea's Navy was severely underfunded. Because up to this point, they hadn't needed one. Their only two big neighbors were China, who was their close ally, and Japan, who'd been killing themselves for the past 100 years, so they weren't a threat ever. And so now he had to take on this daunting task of building up Korea's Navy basically from the ground up. And so he started dusting off some old ideas to kind of see if he could speed things along. And he did a little bit of engineering to kind of help their military preparedness. And this is one of the things that he becomes famous for, is what he does to these ships, basically.
What does he do to these ships?
He invents a new type of ship.
Damn.
This ship is, in Korean, it's called the Gombokson, I think is how it's pronounced. Or in English, it's called the turtle ship.
I've never heard of a turtle ship.
So imagine a regular wooden ship, like the kind of like old, like East Asian sort of like the sort of like wave profile, and then like a sort of blocky front, that kind of ship. And then you build a timber roof on top over the deck. And then you cover that timber roof with a bunch of metal spikes coming out of it.
Damn.
And then along the side of the roof, you build up a bunch of like really thick timber walls, and then you cut out portholes so that your gunners, they didn't have muskets, so I guess whatever their guns were called, they could stick the guns through these small portholes and fire. And then on top of that, Koreans just really liked putting a bunch of just shit ton of cannons on their ships. They loved having cannons on their ships.
Bitches love cannons.
Bitches love cannons. So, yeah, he basically turned every one of these ships into like a small floating fortress. And he specifically designed them in mind for the kind of combat that they might be doing against the Japanese, because the Japanese were not super advanced in their naval doctrine. Basically, it amounted to, like, their navy, quote unquote, consisted of just a bunch of like transport ships that they might have a few cannons on them, but the main goal was to get the ship right up to an enemy ship and then allow all of their warriors on board to board the other ship and kill everybody in like melee combat. Because Japan, they didn't really have the resources to invest in like a bunch of cannons and stuff, but what they did have were a bunch of people that were really good at killing other people with swords. So they played to their strengths, which is, improvise, adapt, overcome. That's classic warfare. And it worked. It did work a lot of the time, because if nothing else, the Japanese had a whole lot of ships. Like a crazy big amount of ships. They had thousands. Korea around this time had a couple hundred, maybe. We're not really sure exactly. Definitely not thousands. So, not great odds going into this.
No, not at all.
It's not really known how many turtle ships that Yi Sun-Sin had built by the time that Japan finally did invade, but we do know that he had a small but powerful fleet. It was probably somewhere between like 80 and 140, somewhere around there. Most of those weren't turtle ships; they were just smaller improvised ships. But a large bulk of them at the center of the fleet were these turtle ships, and they would be the main fighting force. So, 1592, Hideyoshi launches his invasion of the Korean Peninsula, and they first target the city of Busan, which is on the northeastern coast. Busan fell within a couple days, and over the next few weeks, Japan lands 160,000 Japanese troops onto Korean soil. I think I mentioned this when we did our episode on
Tokugawa?
Yeah, Tokugawa. This invasion of Korea right here was at the time, it was the largest naval invasion in all of human history, and today is now the second largest in all of human history, only beat out by D-Day.
Damn.
It was insane how big this operation was and how many guys Japan had to land at Busan. It was an incredible feat of logistics and engineering and military, like tactical military planning. Just insane. I can't put into numbers how incredible this feat was. And from there, over the next few months, they just captured city after city after city. Then they just fell like dominoes. They had conquered half of the peninsula within a couple months. They just swept through the entire place. It was really scary for the Korean people at the time. They ended up capturing the capital of Seoul. At the time, it was called Hansong. They captured the capital on June 16th, 1592. Panic started to sweep through the Joseon military, and numerous naval commanders began burning their ships and supplies because as the Japanese army advanced, because they didn't want to fight and they didn't want to die. They kind of bitched out, but they also didn't want the Japanese getting their hands on these, in all honesty, more advanced ships. And so they just...
kind of understandable.
And so after a little while of this, pretty much the only real naval force that was left was the one under Yi Sun-Sin. He was basically the only naval force that Korea had left. And so when news of the capital's fall had arrived at his headquarters at the city of Yaosu, he ended up, there was a wave of discontent that swept through his fleet, and he ended up having to preserve order by publicly executing a couple deserters, which, that sucks. And then once he got everybody back into line, he pulled down his sails and they set out to confront the Japanese fleet directly around Busan. He just beelined it for Busan, which is fascinating because he had I think at this point he had something like 30 ships, 35 maybe. And he was sailing towards Busan, where there were only about 50 Japanese ships there at any given time, but they regularly had a few hundred ships going in and out. And so that 50 could very quickly become a couple hundred in a moment. So he was definitely crazy outgunned. But he did have the element of surprise because the Japanese at this point hadn't faced any really stiff resistance. And so he starts to set off towards Busan, and the first Japanese fleet that he comes across is at the port town of Okpo. He kind of lucks out here because the Japanese fleet that's at Okpo, there's about 50 Japanese ships there, but all of the sailors on board the ships have disembarked onto the shore so that they can pillage and loot the town. And so all of their ships are just sitting in the harbor completely defenseless. And so he just brings his 4 dozen ships into the harbor using the smoke from the burning village to cover his approach. So he specifically navigated his ships so that they were kind of coming from directions where he knew there was the most smoke obscuring their vision. And so the Japanese sailors didn't even realize that there was a Korean fleet coming up on them until they were right up next to their ships.
Right on the ass.
And once the Japanese sailors noticed, they started to freak the fuck out, and they immediately hopped back into their boats, went back to their ships from the shore. But by that point, their fate was sealed. It was already too late for them, because Yi was specifically waiting for them to get back onto their ships before he opened fire. So he literally, he's just sitting there his lieutenants are kind of standing around him hey, they're coming back to their ships. You want to go ahead and sink them before they get back? And he's nah, not really.
Let them get in.
No, let them get in. Because he knew that if he sunk the ships while they were still out of the ships, then they would just go flee into the countryside and start terrorizing everybody. If he waited until they were back on the ships, he could kill them all with the ships.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what he did. He just sunk all 50 of these ships, or he sunk like half of these ships to the bottom of the ocean, and then the rest of the sailors fled, and he ended up capturing like 24 of them, 24 of these ships, and just taking them into his own fleet.
I mean, if you can take the enemy's ammunitions and turn them for yourself, and smart enough.
Yeah, within 2 minutes, 26 Japanese ships had been sunk, and the surviving Japanese abandoned the rest, and he took them whole. This was his very first ever naval battle. His very first naval battle. And not only is it his first one, he's commanding, and he pulls out a victory like that, which is, even though he did have the element of surprise, still crazy impressive.
Titanium cojones.
Titanium. The biggest balls in East Asia.
Gotta be.
And then after that, he left that harbor and he just kept going. He just started sailing up and down the coast, and he kept finding pockets of Japanese, like these smaller, like scattered bits of the Japanese fleet that he would just kind of corner in their harbors and then blow them to bits. And he did this several times. Like, by the end of his rampage, like, several hundred Japanese ships had been sunk. And he didn't lose a single ship in the entire process. And so, only a few months into this war, while the Japanese army on the ground is making great headway, all of a sudden, Japan is having to readjust their strategies because now they're realizing they may not be able to resupply their army soon. Because their navy is just not equipped to handle this guy. And so they're about to find themselves in a situation where their entire army of 160,000 dudes, which is a lot of mouths to feed, might not be getting food soon.
Damn.
And this whole time, like it's noted in a lot of places, that Admiral Yi was he was able to keep morale up amongst his troops, because morale in Korea at that time was not very high. And he was basically commanding the only Korean force in the entire war that was actually happy and like having a good time.
Damn.
In one part because he kept giving them like big victories, and in another part because he was just a cool guy. He was really nice to people. And he'd go out on the deck and he'd like kind of joke around with people. He'd like play card games with them and just treat them like human beings. It's amazing the effect that has on morale.
Amazing.
So, very quickly, Admiral Yi becomes public enemy number 1 for Japan.
No shit.
And Toyotomi Hideyoshi just really wants this guy dead. And so he decides to get his 3 best admirals. It's 3 daimyos, which their main jobs are not as naval officers or as admirals. That's kind of like a side gig that they have, but they're the 3 most experienced admirals that the Japanese have. And so he takes them off of like their duties at what they're doing like as part of the ground army, and he sticks them onto ships and basically tells them, hey, your job now is to go and kill this guy, and you're going to get as many ships as you need to do it. And so the 3 of these guys got 82 ships and started hunting Yi's fleet and chasing them up and down the coast. They finally found the Korean fleet on August 13th, 1592. Upon finding his fleet, Yi turned his own ships around and started to flee away from them. And the Japanese ships started to chase him. And so he took his ships and he kind of like rounded a corner behind a cliff face so that the Japanese didn't know what they were like kind of following him into.
I just realized we haven't taken any steps for Japan taking an L on those defeats. I can't remember if it was 1 or 2. I'm just going to take 2 just to be safe.
Yeah, let's take 2 for Japanese L's. And then let's take 3 for
Korean,
yeah.
Okay. I literally just forgot the first 2 rules for a little bit. They weren't even in my head. I apologize.
It's all right. I wasn't thinking about it.
Well, sometimes, okay. So I know a lot of the time when I miss rules, it's because my ADHD is acting up and I'm not even like fully paying attention to the story, and I apologize for that. But this time, I was actually just so into the story, I didn't even think about our rules. I was just like,
Which are the best kinds of stories, honestly. Yeah, I won't. I'm okay with that. I'm okay with that situation.
He turned his fleet around, is where you were at.
Yeah, he turned his fleet around, kind of led them behind a cliff face so that they were out of view, and the Japanese ships are just coming full steam, chasing him down. And as they turn around this cliff face, they find themselves in the middle of a narrow strait in between the coastline and an island called Hansen Island. And so as they came around the corner, they ended up getting like caught between the coastline and the island and started...
It was a choke point?
Yeah, it was a choke point. They started getting bunched up. The ships kind of started rocking into one another. And they kind of got stuck there. And then once Yi saw that they were stuck there, he was just like, all right, boys, turn them around.
Fuck they shit up.
Turned him around, pointed all of his cannons right at the very front of this wedge, and then bombarded them with incredible amounts of cannon fire and just completely ripped the spear point of this fleet's wedge apart.
That's an L.
That is a big L. There's a reason I made the Japanese L's the one-sip rule. There's so many of them in this story. So, by the end of the Battle of Hansen Island, 59 Japanese ships were sunk out of a fleet of 82.
Damn.
Yeah, and then 12 of those ships were captured.
Holy shit!
Two of those Japanese admirals, so 2 of the 3 best admirals in the entire Japanese force were taken prisoner.
Fuck, that's the fattest L I think we've talked about on the podcast.
Oh, there are like at least 2 more that are even better than that one.
Fuck!
Oh yeah. And he did this, not a single Korean ship was lost.
God damn.
This guy is awesome.
That's insane. Like, this is the biggest L I could ever imagined. I can't imagine what's even worse than that.
The final big battle is incredible. Well, okay. That one's pretty good. I think the next one that's coming up is probably like the best. Oh my god, I love all of these. Here, let's get to it. So from there, he traveled directly to Busan. Basically, because now that they were out of the way, Busan was basically open. He could just basically float into the harbor. And when he got there, he ambushed the largest part of the Japanese fleet, which were all docked in the harbor. And the cannon bombardment ended up sinking 100 defenseless ships in a matter of like half an hour.
That's insane.
With the 100 ships that he sinks in the harbor at Busan, he basically just destroys the entire Japanese fleet on that side of the sea. Like all Japan has left after that is whatever they still have docked over in their own country. And he
Fuck.
He started this out with like 30 ships at the most. And he's destroyed hundreds of Japanese ships without losing any of his own. This is this is insane. This has never been seen before. And so Toyotomi is forced to basically like, okay, we don't have any way to combat this. We need to cut off our naval operations and cut off our resupply of our army because we'd lose too many ships if we try to keep this up. And so now the Japanese are in their worst nightmare. They've got all of their guys on Korean soil and no way to reinforce them or to get them supplies. And so all of a sudden the war takes on this sort of hopeful turn and everybody in Korea is like, oh shit, we might actually be able to win this. And so that sparks the Korean army to get off their ass and they start launching counteroffensives against the Japanese forces. And then at the same time, that also motivates the Japanese, like out in the countryside, the Japanese peasantry. I keep saying Japanese. The Korean peasantry start start like grabbing like their own their own homemade weapons and their farming equipment and stuff like that, and start like this guerrilla war against the invading Japanese force.
God damn.
And it genuinely does some like a lot of damage to the Japanese forces, because like anytime there's like they have to basically like, keep the entire army together at all times, because if any Japanese like bands, like any like individual units like go out, they're immediately ambushed and killed by just by Korean citizens. And so it ends up turning into like imagine like the Vietnam War on steroids for the Japanese invading force. It gets so bad for them. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention the best part.
That's an L, by the way, in my opinion, so sip.
That is a big L, yeah. I forgot to mention the best part. This whole process up to this point, where now the Japanese are not able to resupply their army anymore, the war has only been on for 3 months. That was 3 months of work. Okay, so all of that story that I've told you so far, that's just in the first 3 months of the war.
The fuck?
Basically gutted like a good chunk of the Japanese fleet in like 3 months. And so the land war ended up grinding to a standstill because the Japanese were still like there in number, but they weren't like able to go any further because they couldn't get resupplied. And at some point like it got bad enough for the Japanese that the Koreans even eventually like they recaptured Seoul. They were able to retake the capital city. The Japanese are pretty desperate to get ships going again, so that they can like finish off because they wanted to knock Korea out pretty quickly, because Korea wasn't supposed to be the war. Korea was supposed to be the launching pad into the actual war with China. And that obviously, this was dragging out, it was obviously going to end up dragging out a bit longer than they wanted. And so Toyotomi decided that if he couldn't beat Yi in battle, then he would beat him through subterfuge. So he sent a spy, who was acting as a double agent, to go and meet with a high-ranking Korean general. And he convinced this Korean general that he would spy on the Japanese for the Koreans and inform them on where the location of the incoming Japanese fleet would be. Because he told them basically like, yeah, the Japanese are sending their fleet back out, and I'll tell you where they are so that you can take care of them. And he told them that the Japanese fleet would be in this particular location at this particular time. This information was passed up all the way up the ranks until it reached the king of Joseon. This guy, I haven't mentioned his name so far because he hasn't been particularly important to the story. But the king's name was Sanjo, King Sanjo. And the king gave Admiral Yi direct orders to ambush the Japanese at this particular location. Yi took one look at a topographical map and a nautical map of the location that they were talking about, and he realized immediately, oh no, this is a trap. I'm not going there.
He's like, fuck off.
Oh no, this is bad, because the location was in the direction that he would have been coming from was full of these like shallow beds filled with like spiky rocks that were hidden like right under the surface. And so a bunch of his ships would have just grounded on all of these rocks and sank. And then he would have had to have rounded a blind corner where he could have been ambushed in a straight, which would have been awful for him. And so he knew that immediately and was like, oh no, this is absolutely a trap. There's no way in hell I'm doing this.
I love how some traps are just like so obvious that like, you're so stupid for thinking this would work. And yet sometimes in history it fucking did.
Yeah. That's the thing though. It was obvious to him, but it wasn't obvious to any of the other military commanders who passed this along to him. And so when the Joseon court found out that he had basically refused these orders that were directly from the king, all of his political enemies in the court immediately used that to raise suspicion about him, calling him...
I call another demotion coming!
Yeah, that's basically... and so, yeah, he ended up being stripped of his command and court-martialed for insubordination, basically. And so he was arrested and he was taken away from his fleet and he was dragged to Seoul in chains where he was imprisoned and nearly tortured to death. It's wild. This guy has done so much for his country, more than basically anybody else alive at this point.
He's done more than some of the fucking generals.
He's done absolutely more than the generals. The generals are fucking useless at this point. He's just being, like, punished for it. Because he's too fucking good at his job. After that, he was once again dismissed from his command and was kicked out of the army, was kicked out of his officership, and once again, he just ended up enlisting as a private. He did it again.
Holy shit. You want to go ahead and take that shot?
Absolutely, yes.
Cheers.
But also, after enlisting, and this was in like the ground army, by the way, he was just in the regular army. And once again, he was the best soldier in his entire unit.
No shit, Sherlock.
And so Hideyoshi, or Toyotomi Hideyoshi, heard about Yi's arrest. And as soon as he heard about it, he was like, okay, this is our chance. Go, 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 go. And he launched the entire Japanese fleet along with 100,000 ground reinforcements, who made it all the way to Korea completely unopposed in 1597.
Could you imagine being that big badass, like, you got demoted, we have a chance, attack!
Yeah. Imagine being the only thing standing between your country and complete subjugation, and your country treats you like constant. Like, at that point, he should just. It would be completely understandable if he was just like, yeah, let them fucking come. What do I care anymore? But he didn't. He kept going. Yi's successor was this guy named Won Gyun, who was an enormous fuck up.
Sounds like it.
And he was slow to respond to the Japanese reinforcements. He let the entire reinforcing army of 100,000 land completely unopposed. And then... just to show you like the kind of shit that Yi Sun-Sin was like, just the kind of odds that he was up against. This is what happens when somebody who's not as good as him gets put in the same situation. Won Gyun had a fleet of 150 ships that were surrounded by 500 Japanese ships at the Battle of Chilchonryang. I think it's Chilchonryang, I think. And out of those 150 Korean ships, 13 survived.
Fuck. God damn.
That's a Korean L.
That's 3 sips, sir.
That is 3 sips. When the king heard about this defeat, he had a nervous breakdown.
No shit!
And in the middle of his fits of crying and panicking and panic attacks, he was able to get out a command to his generals to have Yi reinstated to his naval command.
As he fucking should be.
This guy is incredible.
I feel so bad for like the people who had to convey that message. The king apologizes, sir.
Yeah, so at this point, like returning him to command of the Navy was a kind of a spur of the moment thing. Like just after hearing the news of the defeat, once he was actually back in command, everybody kind of realized like the Navy only really has like 13 ships left. Like there's not much that we can do at that, and so the military command, like the highest ranking military command, basically sent him a letter ordering him abandon your ships and come and bring all of your sailors to act as soldiers in like the main ground force so that we can fight back the Japanese army on the ground. He responded with a letter that said that
go suck my dick.
It was much politer than that, but yes. He responded with a letter that ended with, quote, "Your servant still has 12 warships under his command, and he is still alive, and so the enemy shall never be safe in the West Sea."
The balls! I know we said this earlier, but holy shit, the balls on this man!
Jesus Christ, this guy.
How does this man walk with balls that size?
How are his ships able to hold the weight of his adamantium balls? How does he not single-handedly sink his command ship every time he steps on there?
I don't fucking know, brother.
In October of 1597, Yi found the largest portion of the Japanese fleet, about 300 strong, with all of the Japanese admirals present. Any of the daimyos under Japanese command with any amount of naval command experience were in this fleet of 300 versus his 13 ships, 12 or 13, whatever.
Jesus Christ.
So what he did...
What did he do that's like making you lose your ship, brother?
This is considered to be his greatest victory of his entire career.
I mean, he has 12 or 13, I can't remember the number of ships, and it sounds like he pulls out a victory. So it sounds like he took some fucking massive W's.
So he sends out his fastest scout ship that he has, and he passes his ship right in front of the Japanese fleet. And the Japanese fleet sees the ship, they're like, that's Yi. We're going after that guy. And so they start to follow the ship. And the ship leads them right into the Myeongyang Strait, which is a strait that is famous for a few reasons. First, it's known for its extremely powerful whirlpools. Second, the current of the strait switches direction every 3 hours.
Holy crap!
Third, it is surrounded on both sides by sheer, tall cliffs which cast shadows that a lot of even like large ships can hide in. And the fourth big thing is specifically that day there was a heavy mist.
Damn.
And so this tiny scout ship leads the Japanese force into the Myeongyang Strait. And of course they're going into a strait. 300 ships, they end up getting bunched up like they always do. And the Japanese fleet was just forced to stop in its tracks. And once they were stopped, cannon shots started coming out of the shadows on either side of the strait.
God damn.
And then when the cannon shots started, they tried to maneuver their ships to turn out of the way. But the current and the eddies and the whirlpools meant that they had no control over their ships. They just kind of floated around in circles completely out of their control. By the time the Japanese fleet was able to turn around and retreat, 31 Japanese ships had been sunk.
Holy fuck.
The Koreans did not lose a single ship.
Holy shit!
The Japanese lost about 2,000 guys. The Koreans lost 10 wounded.
What the fuck? That's insane, Derek. That sounds like some bullshit you made up. I know you would never do that, but that's what it sounds like.
You see why I was so excited about this story?
No shit.
Oh, huge Japanese L.
Tantalizing.
The Battle of Myeongyang is remembered as Yi's greatest victory. And it cemented him as one of the greatest national heroes in Korean history. When people in Korea think of Admiral Yi Sun-Sin, they think of the Battle of Myeongyang. That's his big famous moment. With a force of 13 ships, he was able to rout a fleet that outnumbered his 25-1, and Hideyoshi was once again forced to cease naval operations, once again stalling his invasion plans in their tracks.
Sounds like he was the biggest badass that there ever was for Japan, and to be like, that's their boogeyman.
Yeah. Toyotomi would continue to fight for about another year. And then in December 1598, he decided that this invasion was just not going to work. It had failed. And it was time to get out.
Damn.
And so they started organizing a retreat from the peninsula. The bulk of the Japanese army was trapped in the town of Sashan by a combined. By this time, the Chinese had moved in and they were help reinforcing the Koreans. And the Japanese army was trapped in the town of Sachan by a combined force of Korean and Chinese ships. But a Japanese fleet in the harbor at Sachan was planning to rush their navy's line and make a break for it. Yi's scouts identified where the Japanese fleet was going to break through, and they prepared a defense. And by this time, it had been about a year. Their dockyards had been hard at work, and they had been able to reinforce the Korean fleet to a strength of 85 ships. And on top of that, they were joined by the Chinese fleet of about 65 ships. And so this last battle of this war, which, by the way, this war is called the Imjin War. I can't remember if I mentioned that, but yeah, this was called.
I don't think you did. Do you know what the translation of that is?
Okay. So in the Chinese calendar system, that was also used by Korea, the year the war broke out, 1592, was called Imjin.
So it was the War of 1952, essentially?
Yeah, like basically like calling it the War of 1592. But basically, yeah. I didn't know that, huh? So yeah, this naval engagement is the very last battle of the Japanese invasion of Korea, the Imjin War. This was the Battle of Noryang, which began at 2 a.m. on December 16th, 1598. Admiral Yi maneuvered his fleet in such a way that it forced the Japanese fleet to approach the harbor through a strait, which, if you'll count, this is like the fourth time that he has beaten a Japanese fleet by forcing them into a strait where he could bottleneck them.
His favorite strategy is bottleneck that motherfucker.
Bottleneck the fuckers. Which is, when you're outnumbered, that's the only way you can win.
I mean, yeah, you control the flow of the enemy, you can control the flow of battle.
Yeah. So the Korean ships, and this one was not like a super like tactically impressive battle or anything. This was just it was a wash from the start. The Japanese were exhausted. They were facing more even numbers this time. It was never going to go well for the Japanese. But so the Korean ships kept the Japanese at a distance, bombarding them with cannons. And then at some point during the exchange of cannon shot, a stray bullet from a Japanese ship struck Admiral Yi just under his left armpit.
Oh, damn, are we going to lose Admiral Yi?
Yeah.
Fuck!
And in the arms of his chief lieutenant, who is also his oldest son.
Oh, fuck!
He bled to death in the middle of the battle.
You couldn't have warned me, motherfucker? I was not ready for this emotional turmoil.
Oh, shit, yeah. His last words were, "The battle is at its height. Wear my armor and beat my war drums. Do not announce my death."
Fuck, that goes so hard.
Because he knew this was a critical moment in the battle. It was never going to go well for the Japanese, but this could have been a moment where it was like make or break. If the Korean naval force faltered at this point, the Japanese had a chance to be able to slip the blockade and do some serious damage while they escaped. And so he knew at this moment that he couldn't let his death be known because it would destroy the Korean morale. And so he told his son, "Take my armor and keep beating the drum and keep giving commands so they don't know that I'm gone."
That goes so fucking hard, by the way.
Oh my god, this guy was so cool.
This man was like, no, fuck my death. Keep it going. Make sure these fuckers run with fear. God damn.
And so his son put on his father's armor and continued to beat the war drum until the battle was won. Of the 300 Japanese ships present, only 100 survived, all captured, and not a single Korean ship was lost.
That sounds like a big fat L for Japan. I can drink to that, brother.
Huge, fat, fucking L to Japan. Holy shit. A tiny portion, like a handful of ships, were able to escape and return to Japan. The rest were either captured or killed. And later on, by 1601, the entire Japanese presence on the peninsula had been completely snuffed out.
Jesus Christ, that's another L.
I'd say that, yeah, let's go for it.
I just opened a can of something else just to finish the episode out. I'm just at least trying to finish that, if not make you finish yours. So,
after his death, Admiral Yi's body was returned to his family home in the town of Asan, where he was buried next to his father.
Hella honorable.
He was posthumously awarded with numerous honors, both by the Joseon Kingdom and by the Ming Dynasty in China.
I was about to say, are you about to say he got demoted posthumously and sneak one last fucking shot in on me?
That would have been so funny.
I'd be like, these motherfuckers, I swear to God, if they've demoted him after his death, I'm going to kick some... I'm developing a time machine just to kick some motherfuckers' ass for that.
The Kingdom of Joseon invented an entirely new noble title, like a royal title, just to give to him that was never given to anybody else.
This guy deserves it.
Yeah. That was the title of Chung Mogong, which translates as Lord of Loyal Valor. Ever since his death, he has been considered one of the greatest heroes in Korean history. Dozens of towns around both North and South Korea across the peninsula are named after him.
Rightfully fucking so.
Yeah. And shrines in his honor can be found all over North and South Korea to this day. He became an especially prominent symbol during the resistance to Japanese colonial rule between 1910 and 1945. And since that time, he's been seen as a symbol of Korean sovereignty, independence, and resistance to foreign domination. And is still one of the founders of Korea's national mythos.
Fuck yes. This man is awe-inspiring with the shit he pulled off.
God, what a cool fucking guy. Oh, I love this story so much.
Yes, exactly. I don't have anything else to say, but this man deserved more accolades in his life, and he went out like a badass.
Good job on producing a guy like this. What a credit to your people. Ugh. You got any last thoughts before we go?
No, like I said, the only thing I really have to say about this is, holy shit, I did not expect, this man to, I respect this man. I don't respect a lot of military individuals, just because a lot of the time, at least in modern context, I don't believe in the wars, even if they're a brilliant person. We're not going to war for a moral reason. We're not defending ourselves. It's a bunch of bullshit, at least from the U.S. perspective. But this man pulled off so much impressive shit, defended his country from invasion from Japan. It's just holy fuck. This man should be a household name.
I'd also like to point out at final count, under his command in every single battle that he ever entered into, he never lost a single ship.
What the fuck? I didn't realize that. Holy shit. He didn't lose a single... God, this man is so goddamn impressive.
God, he's so cool. I wish I could be him.
I've got a shot already poured. I am taking one last shot for this man.
I got a little bit in there, yeah.
Cheers. I know you already asked me, but what about you, Derek? You any final words before we close it out tonight?
I can't think of anything to say about this guy, except he's just so fucking cool. He's so cool, man.
He's so fucking awesome. Quoting some show incorrectly, I remember, but no, I didn't say it right, but quoting Team 4-Star from the Broly movie, there's a line Vegeta says that sounds just like that, where he's just doesn't want to be impressed by Broly, but it is. Editing Tim will come in and give me the exact line, but turning it over to you, Derek, where can people find you on social media?
They can find me on Twitter at Visigoth. The first I is a 1, the O is a 0. They can find me on Blue Sky at Visigoth. The first I is a regular I. The O is a 0. Tim, give them the good stuff.
So they can find me on Blue Sky and Twitter at Tim, aka Otis, but they can also find the podcast at the Alexander Society Pod on Facebook and Instagram, Alex Society Pod on Twitter and Blue Sky, and Alexander Society on TikTok, where I promise you, at least for this episode, you're gonna get some outtakes. I'm going to work on some beer reviews in the meantime because we've got at least a month and a half before this episode goes up. And I'll at least try and nag Derek because I haven't even been nagging him on these reviews that he's supposed to be giving me for beers. And we're going to at least get a little bit more contact because it's been over a month since we posted shit to the TikTok. I apologize to our audience. I'm hoping by the time this episode goes out, you'll have content to have actually watched on the TikTok. But other than that, we hope you give us a rate and review on your streaming platform of choice, and we will see you next time.
Bye.